So, what can a story from 1600 years ago about a rich guy and a beggar, what can that really teach us about our world today? Well, as we're about to see, a whole lot more than you might think.
It really all comes down to two figures who are locked in this timeless, kind of explosive social drama. You've got a rich man with everything, and then you have this poor beggar, Lazarus, who has absolutely nothing. And their story, it became the weapon of choice for one of history's most powerful speakers, who used it to challenge the very soul of his city.
I mean, just look at this contrast. It's brutal. On one side, you have total luxury, purple robes, massive feasts every single day. And on the other, sores, begging for leftovers with only dogs for company. But the most powerful detail for me is the naming. The rich man, he's anonymous, he's just a symbol. But the beggar, he gets a name, Lazarus, an identity that would echo for centuries. This huge difference is really the engine of our whole story.
Okay, but to really get the full impact of this parable, we've got to understand the world where it was unleashed. So let's go back in time to the 4th century, to this sprawling, chaotic, incredible city called Antioch. Now, Antioch wasn't just big. It was a city of these intense, almost, well, it's like it was at war with itself, full of contradictions. And you can just feel the tension here, right? You had staggering wealth literally rubbing shoulders with the most grinding poverty. You had these famous racetracks and theaters just roaring with crowds, but then right outside the city walls, you had monks living these incredibly simple lives. It was like a city of God living right next door to a city of pure excess. And the friction between those two worlds, well, it was about to catch fire. And into this powder keg steps our preacher, a guy named John. Now, he came from a wealthy family, was highly educated, but he was just completely obsessed with the plight of the poor. He earned this nickname, Chrysostom, which means the golden mouth, because he was such an incredible speaker. And he decided he was going to use this parable of the rich man and Lazarus like a mirror to force his city to take a long, hard look at itself. So, how did he do it? How did Chrysostom actually use this story? Let's get into his analysis, which starts with a pretty surprising diagnosis of the rich man's sin. You might think, oh, it's because he was rich. But Chrysostom argued it was something way more subtle and honestly a lot more damning.
And this right here is the crucial point. The rich man wasn't condemned for something he did. He didn't go out and hurt Lazarus. He was condemned for what he failed to do. His crime was what Chrysostom called dishumanita, inhumanity, a profound indifference. He saw a fellow human being suffering every single day right at his front door, and he just chose to do nothing. He just failed to even see him as a person. Now get ready for this, because this next part is kind of a mind-bender. Chrysostom says the rich man was condemned because he refused the patronage of Lazarus. Patronage. I mean, that flips the whole social order completely upside down. He's arguing that Lazarus wasn't a burden. He was an opportunity. He was actually a potential savior, the key to the rich man's own salvation, and the guy was just too blind to see it. And to really hammer this point home, Chrysostom makes this brilliant comparison to the patriarch Abraham, a hero that everyone in his audience would have looked up to. Abraham, the perfect model of hospitality, would sit outside his tent in the blazing heat, actively looking for strangers to help. The rich man? He couldn't even be bothered with the person who was permanently camped out on his own doorstep. He failed one of the most basic, fundamental duties of his society. Okay, so let's flip the coin and look at Lazarus. In Chrysostom's telling, Lazarus isn't just some passive victim. No, he's elevated into something way more. He's a heroic model of perseverance. Chrysostom doesn't just see a poor, sick man. He sees a kind of spiritual champion. And the way he analyzes Lazarus's suffering is just incredibly detailed. He didn't just say, oh, he was poor and sick. No, he broke it all down and identified 9 distinct layers of pain that Lazarus was enduring all at the same time. Just try for a second to imagine the psychological weight of all this. It wasn't just being poor and sick. It was the crushing loneliness. It was the daily torture of watching others feast while you starve. And that moral anguish of seeing a cruel man thrive while you suffer. And then, on top of all that, having to deal with the whispers from people assuming you must have done something terrible to deserve your fate. By listing all these pains, Chrysostom makes his point so powerfully. Lazarus's real virtue wasn't his poverty. It was his ability to hold on to his faith and his humanity through an almost unimaginable level of suffering. But look, this deep dive into the characters, this wasn't just some academic Bible study. For Chrysostom, this was the foundation for an incredibly ambitious project to completely reshape the culture of Antioch itself. And this brings us to what might be Chrysostom's most revolutionary idea. He completely reframed the whole idea of the poor. They weren't a social problem that needed to be managed or hidden away. They were a spiritual opportunity that needed to be embraced. He argued that the relationship between rich and poor was functional, that it was part of a divine system. The rich needed the poor. And why? So that they could practice mercy and compassion and generosity. By helping the poor, they were actually saving their own souls from that sin of indifference that condemned the rich man in the first place. So his project, his battle plan for the soul of the city had these really clear steps. First, you defend the poor. You put them at the center of everything. Second, you imagine a truly welcoming society, not one where poverty magically vanishes, but one where the poor are seen and cared for. And finally, you make love for the poor the main engine of cultural change. He wasn't trying to tear down the whole social structure. He was trying to perform open-heart surgery on it. So what was the end game? What was he really trying to do? His ultimate goal was to take stories just like this one and make them the new bedrock of the culture. He wanted the ethics of the Bible to replace the old Roman values of status and luxury and to build a new kind of city, one based on empathy and shared responsibility. He saw a single man suffering at a rich man's door and used that one image to challenge an entire culture. And that leaves us with a pretty tough question for our own time, doesn't it? In a world that's defined by its own massive inequalities, what is sitting, ignored, right at our own doorstep? It's a 1,600-year-old question that, you have to admit, feels more relevant than ever.